There weren't always dragons in the city, at least not until my magic failed. I awoke that fateful morning feeling uneasy. I decided to go for a walk because it was such a beautiful day, and I thought just to enjoy it. It was almost spring, and although the air was still cold, the sun shone brightly. I had the day off, and it being Friday, I was looking forward to starting my weekend with something relaxing. I went walking along Valley Stream State Park, taking deep breaths as I did so. A couple jogged past me, and I turned to watch their progress. I walked for a long time, and when I had circled the park twice, I turned around to go back home. I felt breathless but refreshed and renewed, and I hadn't broken out in a sweat, which was strange. Usually, that much exertion would have had me drenched, but instead, I felt exhilarated. That evening, I cooked my dinner instead of ordering out. On my small table was fried chicken, biscuits, two kinds of salads, and for dessert, I had butter pecan ice cream. Because my metabolism was so high, I needed to eat a lot to keep my strength up. I went to bed early, but sometime in the middle of the night, I awoke to the most exquisite and excruciating pain. Mentally, I went over the day trying to figure out what I'd done to cause so much pain. I could hardly breathe. I felt hot all over and my arms, legs, and back hurt. I jumped out of bed and rushed to my balcony. I wrestled the doors open and stood out in the open. Somehow, it didn't feel open enough. The next thing I knew, through the ripping sound of my clothing tearing apart, I'd sprouted wings and a snout. I wasn't really surprised as my magic had been unpredictable of late. I'd cast a spell, and it would go wrong. However, it didn't last long and corrected itself. This time, I feared it wouldn't correct itself. The time had come and I was changing. You see, I come from a long line of shifters. What that means is that mythology has creatures who can shift from their native forms to humanoid forms. For 1,000 years, I've been human. I've mastered the form, evolved it, and just plain nailed it. However, after 1,000 years, the magic had started to break down. I knew deep down that soon it would be gone altogether. As my bones rearranged themselves, my true form began to emerge. I felt a freedom I hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps being a human for that long had given me a false sense of security, but underneath it all, I was a dragon. I was heavier now, and soon the balcony wouldn't be able to hold my full weight. I needed to hurry to ensure that I didn't damage the building. I'd been living there for 4 years, and I really liked my apartment. There was no time to go back inside. In my dragon form, my magic was its strongest. I quickly miniaturized all that I wanted to take with me, took a deep breath, and jumped. I landed lightly on the sidewalk 5 stories down. I looked around to make sure that no one saw me. Another deep breath, and I was flying. I gained altitude quickly to avoid being seen. When I was high enough, I headed north toward the Canadian Rockies, toward Banff National Park. I had a lair I'd established there long ago. Every 10 years or so, I'd make the trip for my peace of mind. I hoped it was still there since I hadn't been in the last 10 years, or that I wouldn't have to evict another dragon. Being left unattended for so long made it up for grabs, and not really by another dragon. Dragons were very respectful of others' homes. It was the occasional bear or wolf that had no manners. Besides, there's my hoard to consider. While in my human form, I hadn't cared about it even though it was worth a lot. But as a dragon, it mattered a great deal. We dragons gathered treasure for security reasons that existed for millennia. I would be pretty upset if it had been touched or looted. As I neared the Rockies, I scanned for the secret entrance. I had to squint, but I found it. The entrance was overgrown, and it didn't look like anyone or anything had been around it. Since it was pre-dawn out, I was confident that I would have privacy. I landed with a bit of difficulty because of the dense forest. I tried to be as quiet as I could, but a being weighing in at a couple of tons made it quite impossible. Whole trees fell as I trudged through the forest. When I had finally gotten close, I whispered words that would magically uncloak the entrance to my cavern. I walked through, and the entrance disappeared behind me. My cavern was vast and deep. In the past, brave young warriors traveled from near and far to my cave to make their fortunes. Rumors of treasure lured hundreds of wannabe looters. Then it was the mountaineers mining for gold. I would allow them entrance and then play with them. Some of their remains lay somewhere near the entrance, but that didn't concern me now. Back in the old world, I gave knights riddles to solve and quests to go on. Upon giving me the wrong answers, or returning empty-handed, I'd roast them. I didn't eat them, because that's not what my kind of dragon ate. We liked sheep, cows, and goats. We were the scourge of farmers. I trudged further into the cavern and followed the downward slope to where I stored my hoard. If memory served, there would be 4 large mounds. Each contained a different type of treasure. One of gold, the other of jewels, and one of great works of art and finally coins. My greatest treasure was the spell books. They were valuable to me because in one of them was the spell that would help me shift back to my human form. I didn't have much time before the change remained permanent. I breathed a sigh of relief. My treasures were untouched. They were protected by a suspension spell that kept them frozen in time, especially the books and artwork. I spoke a word, retrieve. The suspension spell dissipated, and the books were again accessible. I called the book I wanted, and it came to me and opened. I searched for 10 minutes before I located it. The spell called for some ingredients. I needed water, sand, and fire. Luckily for me, I had an underground pool. I summoned water to fill a small bowl, and from the pool's edge was the sand. As for fire, my breath would do nicely. I followed the instructions carefully, placing the bowl of water in front of me, the sand behind me, and the fire in the middle. Carefully, I spoke the incantation and waited. I could feel the magic gathering all around me, but after a few minutes, nothing. Did I cast it wrong? I performed the spell once again, and nothing. My worst fear was that I had not used the spell in time to counter the dragon reverse spell. I'd have to wait another 100 years before I could use it again. That was the nature of the spell. It could only be used once every century. What was I going to do now? I had a job and people I'd made friends with. I had to find a way to become human again. It was the weekend, so I had 2 days to find a solution. But first, I needed to find food. 1,000 years ago, it was easy. Wildlife was plentiful. However, now that there's a resort and a railway in the area, all the edibles had been displaced. I remembered when construction began and the trouble it had caused me. I had to move further into the mountain to protect my hoard. Those miserable people had blasted through the mountains like they owned them. I had to use a lot of magic to steer them away from me and my hoard. I looked around now and saw how people and the years had changed everything. Nothing looked familiar anymore. What was a dragon to do? There were no farms around anymore. Civilizations had destroyed all that was good in the wilderness. I decided that one night without food wouldn't kill me. I lit the torches on the walls to get a better look around. Little boring critters had found their way into the cavern, but the beauty of my magic was that once they broke through the walls, they'd be compelled to turn around and go back where they came from. However, they left their holes in the cave walls. I spent the remainder of the day reacquainting myself with the cavern, repairing the holes and tidying up. I slept fitfully. I dreamed of my home planet and my youth when I had parents to care for me. They had taken a liking to humans and shifted. I was too young to shift, so they needed to keep me safe. Our home was safe enough that they could be away from me for days on end hunting. The town was full of magic back in those days. It was why our family took the human form. As humans, we could live among them, be magical, and no one was the wiser. That was how it was supposed to work out. but it hadn't. My folks wanted to make a living just like the humans did, and went to petition the king for a license to open a business, along with the many who had made the trek to the palace. My father was a smith, and my mother was a seamstress. Both did their craft by magical means. Fat lot of good that did them. What use did the townsfolk have for copper and steel when gold was more valuable? The queen probably had her own private seamstress, and my mother hadn't been able to compete with other well-established seamstresses. I didn't have any siblings, because my parents were too busy trying to be human. They thought they had done their duty by having me. Even the one hatchling was a chore for them. Kolak was a city on Terra that was populated by enchanted beings and dragons. Terra was also parallel to Earth. Being disappointed with the lack of honest work, my parents took to shifting back to dragons out of necessity to feed us. That was when the townsfolk started hunting us. Our kind was hunted down and killed until there were only a few of us remaining in the town. By sheer luck, we found the rip in the fabric of the world and traveled to Earth. Some of us wanted to go back to Terra and found that the tear had been repaired. As a young dragon, I didn't quite understand our predicament. All I cared about was regular feedings. The few of us that chose to remain together founded caves to call home, and we settled until trouble found us again. My parents chose to leave the old world behind and traveled to the new world, just the three of us. At first, things were going great. Food was plentiful, and there weren't many humans around. My parents continued to mimic humans. My father found work mining for gold. I was 500 years old when he died in a mining accident. Some of my hoard was part of treasures he and my mother had amassed from the old world and from the mines. We'd found out that he perished in the cave-in when his spirit appeared to us in our cave. As he took his last breath, the magic concealing our home went out. My mother's magic was strong, but her heart wasn't in it. She became depressed without him, so we moved yet again. My mother lived without a mate for another 1,000 years, but died of a broken heart. Sadly, she had been senile and had become a burden to me, but I took care of her the best way I knew how. I hunted to keep us fed and practiced magic to keep us safe. Those spell books kept us alive. When she had taken her last breath, I moved for the last time. I ended up in the Canadian Rockies and lived there until the humans began building around my mountain. Then I moved to New York. I lived a mundane human life, and for 1,000 years, I was happy. If you enjoyed this story, stay tuned for the next episode. Please like, tell a friend, and subscribe as it helps my channel.